Good evening and welcome to this Michigan Camp webinar. We are fortunate to have faculty member Brian Rubaie, who is a debate coach at the University of Iowa and a longtime staff member at the camp, speak tonight about connection and leadership in online debate. Brian will be a faculty member this summer in the K-Lab at Michigan Camp. If you have questions, feel free to use the Q&A function, and we will go through and answer questions from the audience at the end. We will have one more of these webinars next week on Thursday, July 11th, featuring CV Vitolo Haddad, who will be discussing how incarcerated people organize for reform from within the criminal justice system. We have also published some new files and new lectures, so please check out the Canvas page for those, and don't forget to follow Michigan Debate and at HS Impact on Twitter, as well as at Michigan Debate on Instagram to keep up with all of our new content. And with that, I will turn things over to Brian Rubaie to talk about connection and leadership in online debate.
Hey, thank you so much, Val, and thank you so much to everybody for being here tonight. I just want to welcome you. It's an honor to be here. My name is Brian Rubaie. I'm the debate coach at the University of Iowa, and I'm also an assistant at the Greenhill School. I'm also the president of the Cross-Examination Debate Association, or CEDA, and an MBA candidate at the University of Iowa. And the one thing that kind of unites all four of those in all the recent meetings that I've had, whether I'm attending a class in my MBA studies, or whether I'm leading a squad meeting with the Iowa undergraduates, or whether I'm meeting with the boards of the ADA and CETA and the NDT to try to figure out what next year's debate season is going to look like, there is one really shared theme between all of those, and one thing that I've heard everybody in all those groups express, which is we all really deeply miss the opportunity to be together with one another. And whether you're kind of getting done with online classes or getting started with online camp, whether you're working from home like I am, or whether you're preparing for a season opener on Zoom in your first online debate tournament, we are all struggling acutely with the very same challenge, which is things just don't feel the same as they used to. And that kind of feeling of loss and being apart from each other produces anxiety and stress and loneliness, but it does more than just weigh on us personally. It weighs on our teams and our ability to get good things done. And so as we all struggle to kind of find that same patience that we had before and to rebuild that connection that we have with one another, I am convinced that there is no more important question for us to tackle tonight than the one in front of us, which is, how can I be a leader on my team and help people feel connected and valued? 2020 is the most challenging year that I've ever seen debate face, but the scope of any challenge is equal to the scope of its opportunity. Debate has never needed strong leaders more than it does now, and students who do work now to work on being a high-quality transformational leader that can connect their teams will be doing more than just helping their teams. They'll be helping our activity survive and grow during one of the most difficult times we have ever faced. So tonight, I'm going to proceed in three parts. The first is going to begin with the story and outline the challenge that's ahead of us. The second is going to lay out the theory that I want to talk about tonight in regards to leadership. And the third and final part will outline practices, or a half a dozen practical ways that students can become better leaders to their team during an age which is defined by disconnection. Certainly there is no need to take notes tonight, but if you wanted to, I'm going to jump into what I'm calling part one, which is the challenge ahead of us. So before I dive into substance and talk through the theory and talk through the suggestions, I want to begin with the brief story that helps to illustrate the importance of tonight's topic. If you're wondering, with all the things to be done, with files to be written, with practice speeches to be given, and everything else, why should you take time to really dig in and think about leadership, and not just think about it tonight, but put it into practice after this lecture? Connected teams empower the students and coaches on those teams and drive them to passionately pursue greatness in spite of challenges. Connected teams persevere and overcome at times when they would otherwise fail. Disconnected teams are like an anchor. No matter how hard people work on teams where people aren't connected with one another, those teams are always less than the sum of their parts because they aren't working together. And so in the book Outliers, an author named Malcolm Gladwell introduces a theory that he calls the Rosetta effect. Now, it starts with a relatively simple story, but it requires us to go just a little bit back in time. So right now, we're dealing with the largest public health crisis that any of us have seen. But 4 decades ago, in the early 1980s, the #1 American health threat and the #1 killer of Americans was heart disease. America's death rates due to heart disease were staggering, and scientists were all rushing to try to figure out how to solve it. And so, to oversimplify history, scientists began to approach this problem in a variety of ways, but the problem was it was such a big problem that it was almost hard to tell where to begin. And so one scientist had a novel theory to help figure out, how to, understand and, conquer heart disease. He studied cities throughout the country looking for outliers, places that had very low rates of heart disease. And in doing so, he stumbled upon a very small town in Pennsylvania called Roseto. And Roseto was primarily a group of Italian immigrants who had formed, their own little place over the span of a few generations. And they had fantastically low rates of heart disease compared to the rest of the country. So this scientist went to Roseto and hoped to kind of understand what it was that made Roseto so unique. And so to do that, he used the tools that scientists commonly used at the time. We were just beginning to understand the importance of DNA and genetics in terms of health outcomes. And so he asked that question, was it genetics? And while the people of Roseto did have very similar genetic makeup, all coming from that same town, Salerno in Italy, when the scientist went back and looked at, heart disease rates in Salerno, he found that they were far higher than in other areas. And so, genetics was ruled out. He then asked the question, well, maybe what makes the people of Salerno so special is their diet or their lifestyle. That seems like common sense now, but America was just beginning to understand, the relationship between fitness and diet and your heart health. And so he thought, well, maybe there's something different about the way they eat or something different about the way that they live that can explain why their heart disease rates are so low. But when he looked around, he found that, fitness was not really a big priority in Salerno, that the number one things people like to eat were heavy cream and sausage. And so as much as he wished that that was the solution, unfortunately, heavy cream, sausage, and, low fitness are not the solution to heart disease. So he kept looking. At this point, he was kind of stumped, and the last thing he studied was geography. There was some thought that Roseto was kind of a low-lying area. There were several things about its geography that were unique. Maybe it was something in the air. And so they studied other areas like Roseto, and unfortunately, there was no connection. And so at this point, the scientist, really felt dejected. He'd spent several weeks, working through things. He had hoped to make a big breakthrough, and he felt like he was going to leave knowing no more than when he came in. And so at that point, he packed his bag and said, I'm just going to clear my head and take a walk. And it was at that point that the scientist began to realize that there really was something very different about Roseto. And that kind of observation, wasn't from something he saw in a laboratory. It was from something he saw when he kind of opened his eyes and looked at the problem differently. When he went through that walk through town in Roseto, he saw things that looked very unlike most American cities. There were people out on their porches talking to each other, often several generations of the same family. He could kind of smell, the smell of cookouts, and could hear the sounds of children laughing and dogs barking and people, just having a great time and talking to each other. And he realized that something that made Roseto very different was that all the people in Roseto were very close to one another and looked out for one another. And then all of a sudden, the epiphany, the big galaxy brain idea, kind of became obvious. The people of Roseto had far lower rates of stress on average than most other places because they lived differently. And that helped scientists make the big breakthrough that helped us conquer, or at least begin to challenge heart disease, which is the connection between stress and your heart rate or your blood pressure, and your heart rate and your blood pressure and heart disease. And when they finally made that connection between stress and repeated stress over time and heart disease, they made the big breakthrough. But again, it didn't come from a laboratory. It came from social observation and inference. The people of Roseto really were outliers. He was right the whole time. They were anomalous people who achieved extraordinary things by coming together to strengthen and to uplift one another, to free one another from that mounting stress of everyday life through mutual aid and connection and leadership. And in that way, the people of Roseto helped to teach that scientist and us the most powerful lesson of leadership, that we are only as good as our ability to immediately influence the people around us and to protect each other's health during times of maximum strain. So tonight, what I want to do is, approach this next season and you working with your teams, not as a math problem, not as a science experiment, not as a checklist, but instead from a very simple premise, which is that despite all the pressure of disconnection that we feel in 2020, despite the many challenges the next year is going to present, I'm not going to sugarcoat those, you still have the power to help connect and uplift the people around you and to transform your team if you focus heavily on being the type of leader who connects with and empowers others. Again, I'm not going to undersell it. 2020 is going to be a uniquely challenging year for debaters. I respect, the students this year in particular so much for what they're doing to persevere through a lot of obstacles. It's also a very challenging time for coaches and for programs. When we sent out a survey to college debate directors recently, over half indicated that they were very uncertain about the future of their squad's budget. Nationwide, according to a recent article by NPR, in April alone, there were more than 500,000 high school educators nationwide who were laid off or furloughed. The picture is not one that paints as being a very easy thing to overcome, but it is also then a uniquely important year for debate. The debaters and the coaches and the programs operating in 2020, the students who are on this tonight, the other people who will see this later on, and all of us working together are working to sustain and to reinvent the very core of what we do. These school-sponsored debate competitions, despite unprecedented challenges. So in my mind, the debaters of 2020 and 2021 are heroic. They are continuing to devote their time and energy towards their own intellectual growth at a time where it would have been a lot easier to give in. So if you are watching this, I'm not blowing smoke, but you are already displaying the most important part of any good leader or any ability to form connection in 2020, which is the drive to do so. You've chosen to invest time at this very moment when you could be working on any other number of pursuits, but you're not doing that. You're here trying to figure out how you can be a better leader and how you can better connect your teams at a time when leadership and connection are both so sorely needed. You've chosen an approach to help overcome challenges. So this is the first part of leading and connecting in 2020 and 2021. You have to adopt a mindset which embraces that next year is going to be different. Next year is going to be hard. There's no denying any of that. But we need to create a level of drive and response which is equal to the scope of that challenge. There is a simple 3-word response that I think you can always tell yourself next year every time you face a challenge, no matter what it is. It's 3 simple words, and it's right there in front of you at the bottom of that slide. Embrace the pressure. I'll say it just one more time to be clear and hopefully have it sink in. Embrace the pressure. I'm going to jump into part 2 in just a second and outline tonight's big concept, which is transformational leadership. But I want to tell one more quick story about the origin of the phrase embrace the pressure and how it applies to debate. It actually comes from an old peer of mine at the University of Kansas named Nate Johnson. Before Nate was a graduate of Berkeley Law, he was an undergraduate debater who debated with a new partner his senior year, another colleague of mine and a guy that I was lucky to get to teach my first 5 summers with here at Michigan named Brett Bricker. Although Nate was a very talented debater in his own right, Bricker had done a lot of things by that point which few others had done. And so, Nate was really thrown into a very, fun but very challenging situation. And so, I remember one night after the University of Kentucky tournament, Nate and Brett had made it real late in the elimination rounds. They had just lost a tough one. We were hanging out, kind of standing outside of the Kentucky tournament hotel. And, I was asking Nate, hey, what's it like, man? He was 1 year older than me and doing things I wanted to do. And I said, what's this like? Seems like it's a lot of fun. And Nate was like, yeah, it's a whole lot of fun, but it's also a whole lot of pressure. And that really surprised me because Nate, I wish I had a picture in front of you. He always just kind of seemed like this California surfer washed ashore to Kansas. He had this real laid back attitude. Nothing ever bothered him. But even Nate in that moment admitted he felt extreme pressure as the Elam bracket got thinner and thinner. And so I'm going to fast forward quite a bit. Kentucky was one of the season opener tournaments in college. We were at the very last tournament that season, the National Debate Tournament. Nate and Brett had just defeated a team from Cal Berkeley in the semifinals that had been the year before's top team. And now in the finals, they were matched up against the team that won the national debate tournament of the NDT the year before, a team from Wake Forest. And Nate was a really good debater, but Nate had one kind of fatal flaw, which was Nate was not a quick speaker. And so when they broke a new affirmative, Wake, did something that now, might seem more common, but at the time was kind of like a wait, did it what kind of moment, which was they read 12 off. And I remember when they made the announcement, everybody in the audience, myself included, all kind of looked at each other and were like, oh boy, like, is Nate going to be able to handle this one? And so Nate got up, gave the 2AC, took a big deep breath right after saying the order, and got up and did his thing. And somehow my guy Nate covered, and he got the loudest round of applause I've ever heard after a speech. And it was a constructive speech, a 2AC in the finals, which was unbelievable. Kansas would go on to win that NDT title. And after that tournament, I asked Nate as we were hanging out afterwards, what was that like? You just achieved the pinnacle of college debate, man. You just won the national debate tournament. Is the pressure kind of gone now? Like, and you just kind of take a deep breath? Like, how did you overcome all that stuff we were talking about Kentucky? And Nate looked at me and he kind of laughed. And, he said, I kept waiting for that pressure to go away. And one day I just realized that it wasn't going to. And I would always just kind of feel that pressure no matter what I did or how I approached it. So when I realized that, I decided to just embrace the pressure. And it worked for me. And that simple line of reasoning from a former NDT champion informs that mantra that I want you to remind yourself of next year when you face challenges. Embrace the pressure. Next year is going to be different. It's going to be hard. It's going to be frustrating. But embrace those challenges. Try to approach the challenge as an opportunity to learn how to best manage and lead. The best leaders don't just hope that the pressure will go away or that the teams are going to figure everything out. They actively influence the team and the situations around them by transforming it in the best way possible. And that brings us to part 2 of tonight's lecture, which is transformational leadership. If you were going to take notes, I think, after writing Embrace the Pressure, I think now is probably that time. Just to give a brief overview, I'm going to compress, this is my jam. I love this stuff. I'm getting my MBA now. My specialization and what I'm getting a certificate in is leadership studies. And so what I'm going to be doing is condensing about 5 courses worth of information into about 15 to 20 minutes. So a lot of this is going to be a little bit oversimplified, but all of it is so essential to building a theoretical foundation for the type of leader that you want to be next season. There are a million different definitions of leadership, but I'm going to start and move on to this next slide with what I think is the most, the one that I think captures the best essence of what it means to lead in the sense that I'm talking about. And so leadership is a process whereby an individual influences a group of others to achieve a common goal. Leadership is a process whereby an individual influences a group of others to achieve a common goal. It's a process. That's the first thing I want to emphasize. It's a process. It's not something you wake up one day and learn to do perfectly. It's not something that when you do it right, you figure out how to do it perfectly. It's a lot like debate. You can always do it better. You can always be improving. You can always be studying and figuring out how to improve at your craft. So just like you can always be a better debater, just like there's never been a perfect debater, there's never been a perfect leader. It's a process every day. It involves influence. And I want you to hang on to that in your head, because later we're going to talk about the difference between influencing other people and overpowering other people. The difference between influence and power. It occurs within a group context, and it involves goal attainment. Certainly in the field of studies that I'm in, in business, they have you do more group work than in other contexts. But nonetheless, the one thing I can tell you now, about a dozen years after having graduated college and worked in a variety of contexts, one of the biggest challenges you'll face in your life is not how to get the job done or how to get it done well. You'll figure that part out pretty quick wherever you go. The hard part is figuring out how to get that done and work with other people that you have to work with to get things done. You can't just say, I'm right. You can't just say the judge voted for me, so we're going to do it my way. You have to work with other people to get things done and to accomplish goals. So before I move on to kind of unpacking that a little bit more, I want to just say, if you're one of those people who's like, I don't know, leadership studies, seems a little bit corny to me, seems a little bit obvious, seems like maybe it's something either you're born with or you just figure it out on your own through context, not something somebody else can teach you. I want you to know that that was actually my baseline response as well. But I also want you to know that that is not the type of thing we're talking about when we say leadership studies. And that's not what I'm calling for tonight. So the other side of that slide, the little portion in black, what leadership is not, points to two really important facts. And I'm going to do a lot of condensing of the field of leadership studies here. Number one, leadership is not innate, it's not born, and it's not universal. For a long time, from about 1900 to 1970, almost the whole of leadership studies emphasized what they called the personal characteristics of, quote, the great man, and said that leadership was either something you were born with, or it was some form of behavior which encouraged extroversion and the acquisition of power. These studies, and I know this is, you're going to be like, yeah, okay, K-Lab guy, but whatever. No, this is where the literature base went. These studies were often racist, sexist, and predictably, given the first two things, highly incorrect. Leadership studies have come a long way since then. And some of the seminal kind of people in the field now are Black women, like Linda B. Hill at the Harvard Business School. So you see that note there, don't study the past, study people like Linda B. Hill at the Harvard Business School. If you want to look into anybody else, if you find tonight's topic interesting, look at some good stuff from Linda Hill. A lot of tonight's stuff comes from her. But I just want you to know that those old studies, that's not what we're talking about tonight. The second thing I want to emphasize, and I hope this would go without saying, but it doesn't, is that leadership is not an unquestioned good. Just because you are good at leading people to do things does not mean that you are leading people to do good, good things. Leadership without an ethical compass is a devastating force. In leadership studies, we refer to something we call the dark trio, which is narcissism, which is marked by grandiosity or pride or egotism or a lack of empathy, Machiavellianism, which is when you manipulate or exploit other people, when you have a disregard for morality, where you're more focused on your own self-interest or where you deceive other people, or psychopathy, antisocial behavior, impulsivity, remorselessness. Those are traits of so many leaders throughout time. I don't need to name names for you all to get some ideas in your head of who that might describe. But, it is not an unquestioned thing if you are good at leading people. Leadership this is why it's so important then to understand this next point, which is the difference between influence and power. So if you didn't know, so we move now to the next slide, between the difference between influence and power. Influence is the capacity to change the behavior, attitudes, or values of another person or a group. That's influence. It's the capacity to change their behavior, or attitudes, or values. Doesn't just mean you force them to do it. It means you got them to change the way they look at things and do things the way that you think should be done. Power is different. Power is simply the potential of a person or a group to overcome one another. So the goal of tonight is to help you interact within your shared peer group. It is not to help you outsmart, outwit, and, kick out your teammates until you get your way. We're not trying to produce a whole lot of kids following the dark trio. That is not tonight's goal. The goal is to help you figure out how you can influence people to move towards your goals, not to overpower them. So, apologize. Moving now to the next type. I just want to point out really quickly, there are also two other types of leaders that are not necessarily bad kinds of leaders. There are lots of people who do this kind of leadership and their groups get perfectly good things done. But these are not the kind of folks that you're writing home about, and they're not the kind of leaders that we need in 2020. There are groups of people called transactional leaders. These people are really good at making sure that they just kind of, get the task completed successfully. They don't really care how you do it. They're very hands-off. As long as you turn in good work and get from point A, when the thing is assigned, to point B when it's due, don't care. I'm not going to tell you how to do your thing. That's a transactional leader. There are also people who do what's called management by exception. Management by exception. And these are the people who are very deadline driven, but instead of just kind of staying out of your way until they do it, they are either actively involved, they are actively monitoring your work and taking corrective action. These are people we call micromanagers, and nobody really likes that. But there are also people who do this passively. There are people who really, they give you a huge project, they don't give you any direction about how to do it, and then you turn it in and they're like, this isn't what I wanted, what are you doing? They weren't bothering you along the way, but they weren't giving you any good input either, and then you find out at the very end that things were not the way that they wanted. I'm sure that all of you have had teachers that fit very clearly into these, kind of categories. You might ask yourself the question, well, yeah, can't these people still be influential? Can't you still lead, this way? Well, yes, sure. You can try to boss other people around, but there is a shelf life to hard influence tactics, and they often backfire. And this is the most important part of all, hard influence tactics, i.e. telling other people what they're going to do and then kind of managing them along the way as they do it. That is not something that's easy to do if you occupy the same power position as the person you're working with. It works if you're somebody's boss. It doesn't work if you're somebody's teammate, even if you are their older teammate. So you don't need to be the kind of person who's getting in everybody else's business. You don't have to figure out how you can coerce people or what you can do to exchange things with them to get what you want. Even those upward appeals, that maybe work in some other contexts, like, well, if you don't do your part, I'm going to tell the coach. That stuff also doesn't work for very long. None of that stuff is leadership. None of that stuff is leadership. At the very best, you are getting people to comply sometimes, but there is a huge, huge difference between compliance and commitment. A difference between, okay, I'll get this done because somebody's yelling at me, but I've kind of lost the love for doing it, versus I really want to get this good thing done and this person is helping me do it. There's a world of difference between those two things. So where does that leave us? If we don't want to rely on power and risk falling into the dark trio, if we dream of being more than simply a transactional leader or someone who manages by exception, then what is it we should strive to be? What is leadership? Okay, you've talked forever about what leadership is not. What is it and what should you do? This is where I want to introduce one of my favorite concepts that I have learned the entire time that I've studied during my MBA, and it's really the cutting edge of the field in leadership studies. And it's called transformational leadership. Transformational leadership. What makes a transformational leader different than somebody else's, even once leadership studies evolved, once we got past it being an innate trait, once we got past the idea that it was something great men did, once we started to expand the field of study, even now in 2020, too often people associate business managers as leaders, and that's the only context that they have for leadership. Too much of leadership studies is business studies, and that's a big mistake, because what produces profit is often very different than what helps achieve other much more important goals in society. Transformational leadership came from a lot of the people who were traditionally excluded from leadership studies and wanted to look at leaders outside of the context of business, outside of CEOs and management positions. They looked at activist leaders. They looked at leaders in communities. They looked at people who led in a variety of different contexts to focus less on how do you lead just in this one field, but how do people lead one another generally? How do we really transform, the things that we're a part of? Fundamentally, in debate, you are embedded with all the other members of your team. You have all made a mutual choice to share a really fundamental aspect of your life journey together. You're going to be teammates, and you only get one set of high school teammates or college teammates. And again, you are so deeply and intimately embedded with one another. The leaders are the people who help you get to where you strive and where you want to be. A leader is not somebody who says, here's where we're going to go, and I'm going to tell you, what to do. A leader is somebody who says, okay, here's where we've decided that we all want to go and what we all want to achieve. And here are ways that we can go and do the things that we need to do to transform and get us there. So transformational leadership is marked in an easily memorable way by what are called the 4 I's of transformational leadership. The 4 I's of transformational leadership. The first I of transformational leadership is inspirational motivation. Inspirational motivation, which is having and communicating a clear and compelling vision and showing other people how their work is a part of it. Again, having and communicating a clear and compelling vision and showing others how their work is a part of it. And it's here, that I'll just make a quick note to my time in debate. My senior year, one year, we were preparing to debate in the double octave finals against a team from Northwestern University, one of the most, if not the most successful debate team of all time. We were debating some younger folks from Northwestern. I'll admit I was feeling a little bit cocky as an older person. And so I went down to the hotel lobby at about 10:30 to go, get a soda and just have something to drink before I went to bed. When I went downstairs in the lobby, I saw something that really, kind of inspired me, but I'll be honest, shook me up a little bit. It was what I could only describe as just a flood of purple, from wall to wall purple. There were just tons and tons and tons of these Northwestern students all preparing to debate, us, including one kid that I had coached for the last 4 years of high school. He was a freshman at Northwestern, that little traitor. I'm just kidding. He wasn't a traitor. He was a good teammate. But, the amazing thing about Northwestern debate is their old coach, Scott Deathridge, or the Duck, may he rest in peace, used to say that Northwestern is guided by teamwork and hard work. And he'd repeat that over and over, teamwork and hard work. And I always thought, yeah, okay, that's a great, catch slogan. I'm sure administrators love that, but I saw what teamwork and hard work meant. I saw, a whole flood of purple, like I said, in that, hotel lobby. And that's what inspirational motivation is. That's when you've got, the kind of squad ethos that's guided by a transformational leader who can inspire people and motivate them towards their squad's vision. And this is where I want to encourage you to ask yourself, what is it you're trying to accomplish next year? Anytime you feel stuck and you feel like you're kind of challenged by, next year's, debate challenges, and embrace the pressure as a mantra just isn't getting it done. I want you to stop and just pause and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I working so hard? And remind yourself, what is the point of doing that? And when you have those meetings with your team, and when you talk about why you're all working so hard, remind yourself of this. What is your squad's vision? What is your vision? Why are you putting so much work into this activity? And if you know the answer to that and you live your life in a way that makes that clear, you will inspire others to do so as well. And that leads to the second point, which is idealized influence. Idealized influence. The second I, idealized influence, means you're acting as a role model. You are earning your followers' trust or other people on the team's trust by acting consistently and showing dedication to them. One of my favorite, rock bands from way back when I was, in high school and college is a band called The Strokes. And they just put out a new album. And one of the things I recall them saying is that people who say the right things and act the wrong way are the worst kinds of people. And I couldn't agree more. There's an old saying by a rapper named Nas that's, you are who you are when nobody's looking. And all those things are true. And so, you can try your best to inspire people. You can try to tell people, here's what the vision of the team is, and that matters. People need to know that, to have that big picture vision. But that won't mean a darn thing if you don't follow through and act, with the way that you tell other people they should act. If you don't walk the walk, if you only talk the talk, you won't have the ability to influence anybody. And worse, you'll look like a hypocrite. The third major I is intellectual stimulation. Intellectual stimulation. And that means you're the kind of leader who not only inspires people, not only shows them the right way to do it, but also empowers them and encourages them to be creative in problem solving and stimulates people to question the status quo. The very status quo that you yourself are constructing. you don't just want a debate team. If you're a senior, that's a whole lot of people who agree with you. That leads to something that's called groupthink and its own, form of bias altogether. You want to encourage and empower people to do things that are challenging, encouraging, including to challenge your own ideas. And so to put this in practice, when you're doing your assignments next year, for example, if you keep giving your second years, uniqueness updates, and then asking them why, they aren't improving in their 2 and R's, or why they aren't doing better at writing other files, well, maybe because you're not intellectually stimulating them. Maybe because you're not putting them in positions to fail and then to learn and then to grow. Anybody who thinks that they used to write perfect files, like they were just a 15-year-old wonder, I mean, maybe a handful of people in their life, maybe, but I will tell you 99% of people learn through failure and learn through repeated failure. And so you've got to put people in that position to do tasks that are intellectually stimulating to help people grow. And the final kind of task, if you have inspired people, if you have influenced them and set a good example, if you have intellectually stimulated them and made them feel challenged and encouraged and empowered to challenge the status quo, the final I in the 4 I's is individualized consideration. Individualized consideration, which is showing interest in others' well-being and providing individual attention when working with people and assigning projects. This is something that I'll talk a lot about in practice later on in terms of how to do this on your debate team, but simply showing people that you care and that you're there really matters. People know who those people are, and those things matter a lot. So when you check in on people, when you know somebody's not having such an easy time, or they had a million texts, and you just sent that text, it's like, hey, hope you're holding up okay. That means a lot. That individualized consideration, people knowing that you care and that you're looking out for them and you're rooting for them, that is what a transformational leader does. So again, the 4 I's: you inspire, you influence, and you lead the way, you intellectually stimulate, and you show individualized consideration, and you show care for other people's well-being. That's what a transformational leader does. Now, in terms of practice, right, and in terms of some of the tactics that a transformational leader uses, instead of using hard influence tactics, like trying to coerce people or bully them or negotiate QPQs for who gets their way this time, transformational leaders, in contrast, rely on very different influence tactics. And those are rational influence tactics and soft influence tactics. Rational influence tactics are the most common, and they're the most effective if you can pull them off. It's just simply persuading people through logical arguments and winning the argument. This is, again, the most common and effective way, but again, this not only relies on a degree of expert power, i.e. somebody accepting that you just know more about this than they do. It also is a very hard thing in a world where you're working with debaters, because face it, y'all, we are often stubborn people. I know you're thinking debaters, stubborn, will never. But sometimes you just can't rationally influence someone because they've been trained. They just have to win the argument, and there can't be a compromise. So if you can't rationally influence someone else, you can use what's called soft influence. Soft influence tactics are those tools that you turn to when rational argument fails, and they can take 3 major forms. The first is a personal appeal. When you're relying on friendship and shared characteristics and values, and things that you both agree on. The second is an inspirational appeal. We were talking about inspiring people before. This is one of those moments where you can kind of, relay to somebody like, hey, I know a lot is really going wrong. I know a lot of things are challenging, but we set these goals at the beginning of the year, and I really think we can do it if we just keep working towards it. And then the final one is consultation, involving other people in decision making. If you and your co-captain of the team, don't agree about something, it doesn't mean you're just hopelessly deadlocked. And we've got a hung jury. That's not how this works. We still need to figure out what to do and how to move forward. And so you consult other people, you bring other people into the decision-making process, and you both act like adults. That's the important thing. You can't get good, honest advice from other people if you aren't willing to lead and you aren't willing to say, we'll respect whatever the will of the group is. So now that we have kind of identified the scope of the challenge ahead of us in 2020 and 2021, now that we have identified and laid the foundation for a theory of transformational leadership, part 3 is how to transform your team. How to transform your team. I'm gonna take a drink of water just real quick. So, there are specific practices that you can employ to become the kind of transformational leader who connects teams and helps to preserve the future of debate. I'm going to offer, 6 practical suggestions in just a moment, but I want to say, just kind of as like a foundational theory, that when we talk about transformational leadership, we usually talk about 2 types of behavior that they attempt to influence. One is task-focused behavior. And so that's when you give priority to the task at hand. It's called problem-oriented leadership. In this, you're more focused on clearly defining the roles on your team, planning, organizing, scheduling, monitoring progress, and setting and meeting goals. Every transformational leader, even if task-focused behavior is not your strong point, you can't let this stuff go and just hope that if you're smart enough, it'll all come together. You do need a plan. And the second thing is you need some person-focused behavior. And that gives kind of priority to people that are being led or being worked with and their needs and concerns. This is just, again, that basic consideration for others. And this means you focus on doing things like fostering positive relationships, developing good communication among your team, and kind of, analyzing and evaluating and improving the individual and team needs. And so how do you do that and put these theories into practice? How do you engage transformational leadership in ways that are both task-focused and person-focused? The first is start with non-debate connections. I know that might seem counterintuitive, so the way you become stronger as a debate team is you do things that aren't debate. Okay, I get it. But if all of your connection is tied to debate and to interacting with each other at debate tournaments, you aren't going to have that this year. If you don't get along that well outside of tournaments, but you all band together when you're at the tournament, that's not going to work when you're all debating from different houses. And so, I know the last piece of advice that, you all need is a 32-year-old on a Zoom on a random Thursday telling you, here are cool things the teens can do. But I also want to offer a few pieces of practical advice for people that have been struggling with wanting to connect with their team, wanting to get back together, but not knowing how. The first is, do some hangouts. One of the things that I love about kind of teenagers in high school and miss about teaching is, teenagers really have this just remarkable ability to just transform the spaces they've been given and make them into something else entirely. I see it happen every year in our lab room. I used to see it happen in my classroom. You do that when you have physical space. You can do that with digital space. Zoom exists for meetings. Yeah, that's how it was designed and envisioned, but Zoom does not have to be all business. You can have fun and just hang out with each other and talk on Zoom. Iowa, for example, we've had some initial topic meetings. We talked about the resolution and our first wave of assignments and all that stuff, sure. But we've had far more meetings where we just got together and had fun. And doing that makes it so much easier to come together and do some work. We are a group of people who are not just united by, okay, we do debate, so when we want to do debate, we get together, but when we don't, we don't. We are a group of people who like each other, who all get along well, who all hang out and have fun and joke and look out for each other. And we also do debate together. But it's not the only thing that defines us or the only thing that can unite us. And certainly you can use tools like Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever feature on Facebook. And this is where you can tell the 32-year-old part's kicking in. But you can get together with people in ways that were not envisioned originally with the technology. One form of that, the second suggestion, is watch parties. Netflix has this built into their platform. You can watch things together. It's really cool. But there's no reason it has to be Netflix. If you're going to sit around and watch new shows, why not do it with someone else? Why not watch it in real time together? Why not watch debates together? Why not hang out and watch the MDT finals with some of your teammates before you get to camp? That kind of stuff is a lot of fun. Number 3, I would highly encourage you to throw just little virtual gatherings to celebrate people who've just done good stuff. In general, people in life really remember who was there for them to help them celebrate in those moments they were up. That means a lot. Like when you succeed and you do well and other people reach out to let you know they're happy for you and they really enjoy seeing you do well, that means a lot. So maybe form some events to celebrate those small things, not just big milestones like graduation, but if somebody got an internship, if somebody accomplished a major goal, things like that, celebrate one another. Number four, I think it's a great idea to form book clubs. I really think that at this time, taking a little bit to get away from screens and just read something that really gets your mind going, but then come back together with other people and have those stimulating discussions, over a screen is a wonderful thing. And just remember too, you don't always have to do all these things over a video chat. That's not like the new default. It's not like you always have to be face to face or well dressed. You can do, now Viber and other apps let you do group calls with over 40 people. You can do this on a phone call. There's no reason you have to be dressed up, to just talk about a book. Similarly, you can do things together. Like, for example, there are great workouts that are being offered for free. So like say Orange Theory Fitness offers, great kind of group workouts. This may not be something everybody in your team wants to do, but if you've got a few people that really enjoy fitness and miss getting together, you can have little group workouts, and those things are fun. It kind of keeps you accountable and it keeps you honest and helps you have a good time. You can also do little cooking competitions. Something that I'm going to really miss this summer is the University of Michigan staff some summers has done some little cooking competitions against one another. They've been great. I love it. I'm not a good cook. I just get to eat and enjoy it all. But you could do things like maybe share a recipe together, or say we're all going to make this, and then maybe I'll take pictures of it, maybe see who did it better. I don't know. It could be like a little cooking competition. Working with undergrads and seeing a lot of people who've recently graduated, they're really proud when they cook something good. So maybe, that could be something that brings people together. Serving others could be something that brings people together. There are a lot of squads who are trying to get things rolling and get new teams off the ground, but they don't really have very much experienced leadership. They could use guidance. They could use judges. And that's only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to service opportunities. There are obviously no shortage of really important causes that you and other members of your team may feel really strongly about. Working on those things together now at this time may be a wonderful moment to kind of come together in bonds and to do something good for the world, and to tell colleges that even when it was very difficult to do so, you still found ways to reach out and help your fellow human beings. And the final thing I'm just going to say is just like, when you're in doubt, try harder. Not all these things are going to work for everybody. You're probably never going to get like universal 100% attendance at any of the following things. That's fine. You don't need that. You just need enough people getting together to keep that fire alive and keep that spark going. And if you're somebody who struggles with all this, if this is not your lane, just reach out and show people you care and that you're there. Set up streaks on Snapchat. Send a couple funny texts to the group text. But just generally, if you're an introvert like I am, that's fine. I wanted to note earlier, introverts actually have far higher levels of success on average when they're surrounded by proactive teammates than extroverts do. That's a kind of surprising fact. But you've still got to go out of your way to connect with people. It can't just be a lot of emails that say all the right things but don't bring people together. The second big piece of advice I want to give is called each one, teach one. This is an old concept, but I want to say something. I'm not selling anybody. Everybody on this call is already at the University of Michigan debate camp. So I'm not saying this is a sale. I'm just saying this is a fact. You're rocking with the best. Like, I genuinely believe that. Not saying that to put down any other camp, but I really believe that Michigan is the best debate camp I've ever seen. And I really think you can do a lot of good for our community by paying that experience forward. When you teach others, you learn more. I really think that the best way to boost your own knowledge is to judge debate and to teach others. And so you should try to find ways to keep people tuned in. It doesn't mean that you've always got to be talking to people. You could even just have a Dropbox folder where you keep your notes from lectures and your notes on files and the feedback you get from judges in your debate and your rebuttal video recordings and whatever else. You put all of that stuff in there and everybody else has access. They can learn from you. They don't even have to contact you. They can just listen and follow your moves. But you do also need to be active about this. You can't just be like, hey, it's in a folder, you figure it out. Okay? I'm going to try to challenge everybody here to employ what I call the rule of 3. It's really simple. It just means that every single time you have a mind-blowing epiphany at debate camp, every time you learn a mind-blowing fact, and that should be happening at least once or twice a day. So it happens once or twice a day for me, and I've been going to debate camp for longer than some of y'all have been alive, and teaching at debate camp for some of y'all have been alive. You're still going to have your mind blown every day, several times. You need to make note of those things, and for every single one mind-blowing fact, you need to tell that to 3 other people on your team. If you employ that, holy cow, you can improve your team dramatically and quickly. Point number 3 is about developing better meetings. Transformational leadership doesn't just mean like you throw at everything, like no more meetings. Those businesses that don't have meetings usually fail. But you need to make your meetings better. And to make them better means that they need to be consistent and short. It is much better to have small weekly meetings than one long monthly meeting. Some people, I get it, they want to strive for 100% participation, and they feel like they can only get that if they meet once a month. So they say, look, we'll only do it once a month, just make like 3 hours in your calendar, we'll go through everything, we'll all be there, we'll get it done. Don't approach a meeting as like, okay, well, gosh, we'll drag our way there and we'll get it done. No, nobody's going to be able to make it to every single meeting all summer. No individual meeting is probably going to have 100% attendance. Fine, throw that goal out the window. What you want are just short, consistent meetings, weekly over monthly, short over long, because nobody, and I mean nobody, wants to be sitting on Zoom that long. I just got done with a course that I loved, one of my favorite courses that I've taken in grad school, but it was 4 hours of synchronous instruction that went until 10 p.m. on Wednesday night, and we were up at 8:30 a.m. on Saturday morning taking a quiz and doing 8 hours of synchronous, work. Love that class, love that professor, hated that format. That does no good for anybody. So what you want is you want good short meetings that establish clear goals. The goal of every meeting is not to just like figure out everything. The goal of every meeting is to figure out and nail down a few major important things that you'll address between then and the next meeting, to set the date for the next meeting, and just to know what people are doing and who's doing what. That's it. You mess up meetings when you try to do too much. The biggest piece of advice I can give you, and this comes from the Harvard Business Review guide on how to set effective meeting agendas, is you want to set and send those agendas at least a couple hours in advance and give people time to prepare. And you want to identify what the main goals are so people know especially where you're going to want input. So for example, with the recent Seed of Summer meeting, we had a million different topics that we needed to cover, but the most important ones were how do we preserve college debate and how do we prepare it to go online. We spent a good amount of time on that. We had it structured, we had it built in. We told people about a week in advance, here's what we're trying to talk about, here are the big ideas. And we had a great and productive meeting where a lot of people moved through ideas, boom, 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 very quickly. I don't know if anybody's ever seen Money Heist, but it's like, Nairobi says, boom, chicka, boom. That's kind of the meeting you have, the rhythm you have at your meetings when you let people kind of prepare in advance. But good meetings come from good preparation. They don't just come from everybody just showing up and saying whatever they just thought of off the top of their head. That's not a good meeting. Similarly, number 4, in terms of constructing better assignments and being a better leader in that regard, there is a school of thought, and I get it, which suggests like, well, you're going to need like one huge core negative file, for each and every major, affirmative case. I don't really subscribe to that. Like, I don't know if by the end of August, you're going to need like a 300-page body camera thing. What you need are small, usable, high-quality files that identify the best cards and the best strategies. And so what you want to shoot for are things that are, files that are short and clear versus ones that are big and messy. The goal is not to have some magnum opus that's like, here's how big of a file I can make. That you're hiding your best stuff when you do that. That's the opposite of effective. You want high quality usable files that are easy to go through and navigate. Similarly, you want to establish a clear timeline and check-ins. And what I mean by this is you don't just hand the sophomore an assignment and say, turn something in next month. You assign a file, you help them identify what that file is going to need, you help them set priorities, and then you say, hey, along the way, I'm going to get in touch in between, just to make sure that you've got things under control and see if there's anything I can do to help. That's very different than micromanaging. It's very different than what I was talking about before, which is managing by exception. Because even though you are checking in to support and to help based upon a process you each mutually agreed to, rather than constantly micromanaging them and making them feel stressed by being like, give me an update, where are we at? So number 5 is you want to connect not just to your team, but to your community. Your local rivals aren't just your rivals, they're your colleagues, and they can be your lifelong friends. I was thinking about this when I was talking to an incoming University of Iowa debater named Maddie, who debated at Blue Valley Southwest. And I asked Maddie, what are you going to miss the most, kind of coming here? And Maddie said, well, my best, friends are the other debate people in Kansas City. I'm going to miss getting to see them all the time. Yeah, that's wonderful. You should never deprive yourself of that experience, and you should be working to build that. Even when it's hard, you should be working to build that. I remember one of the hardest moments that I ever had as a coach was, I was working at a school in Chicago, and we made it to the finals of the TOC, and we were so close. We lost on a 2-1 to a team from Iowa City West. And, being a bout away from winning the TOC stings. And at that moment, I didn't want to be near anybody. I didn't want to talk to anybody. But my most lasting memory from all that is not the loss or what we lost on or what the decision was. It's that we got together with Iowa City West at about 2 a.m. at some random Waffle House in Lexington, Kentucky. And we all shared that moment together, and it was special. And no matter who won, we were going to share that moment together because we were friends and we were colleagues, and it meant a lot to all of us to see each other succeed. And so, in particular, I want to challenge everybody. I know there's a million ways to say in these times, and I know that gets really obnoxious, but, I'm not going to say it's always bad, when things are divisive. Sometimes we need clear divisions in society. We need to clearly stand up to things and say certain things are wrong. But at the same time, the divisions we need are not ideological divisions. We don't need to build walls between each other. And unfortunately, those emerge easily enough on their own. One of the things that I think the future of college debate hinges on is our ability to kind of come together and form mutual solutions. And in the same way, I think the future of high school debate depends on your generation, students like you, reaching out to people who do things that are different than what you do and finding ways to form community and friendship. The final point I'm going to make is just, try to find, ways to safely and slowly, reconnect. I put this in all big capital letters at the start. Follow all guidelines. Follow every health guideline. Follow your, family's health guidelines. I'm not telling you to do anything that is not acceptable. What I am saying is, it's kind of easy to feel like, well, there's nothing that you can do socially with other people that is not safe and responsible. And I just don't think that's true. I've seen some innovative things here. Maybe this is going to sound very Iowa, but when I drive by Liberty High School, one thing I see is like I'll see kids all kind of sitting in parked cars, like 5 spaces apart from each other, sitting in their trunks and just kind of talking. They're so far away. They're like more than 20 feet apart. They're in the outdoors, but they're out there talking to each other. Iowa has a lot of, trails that have set up for what they're calling socially distant walks. And these are just spaces to kind of get out and to be close to one another if you feel the need to get out into bonds from something that's not just a computer screen. But no matter what you decide to do or what tactics you choose to employ, I just want to bring us back to what should be the 3 major takeaways from tonight. Number 1, no matter who you are, no matter what your personality is, no matter what age you are in school, no matter what arguments you run, regardless of everything else, you have the power to connect and to transform your debate teams. And the way that you behave has a powerful, kind of force in how the future of the debate's going to look. You all are the future. Number 2 is you should embrace the pressure that is going to come next season. And as much as possible, try to view each new challenge as a new opportunity. And finally, you should remember those 4 I's of transformational leadership. If you have the capacity to inspire people, to exert idealized influence, and to be a good role model and show people how it's done, if you can put together intellectually stimulating work that makes people feel challenged and empowered, and if you can show individual consideration, look out for the people around you and take care of the people you love, I guarantee you, you're going to have a much more successful season. But even more importantly, when you look back on 2020, 2021, and all the things about this year that are going to be different, you're going to look back on something that you're very proud of, which is the way that you and your teams approach the biggest challenge ever to face debate. Thank you all so much. And I'd like to turn it over now to questions. I apologize if I mess up any of the tech. If any of that happens, that's me, that's not them.
You are fine. I'm going to go ahead and read out some of the questions. If anyone has additional questions for Brian, you should feel free to add them to the chat, and I will go through and read them so we can kind of go through and talk through them. So the first question is, how should we as students coordinate with our coaches about any troubles the team's infrastructure may face?
That's a great question. Right now, a lot of coaches are kind of in a wait and see mode. Budgets for high school and college and most educational budgets are primarily set in kind of mid-June. And so I would say that for a lot of your coaches, even for me, and I've been asking my bosses all the time, they may not know the answer to those questions at this time. But what I would say is if you can do these things, if you can do some of the work of uniting and bringing your team together and some of that file work, I will tell you as one of those coaches who is struggling through a lot of these infrastructure challenges, you all doing that work, you all coming together and kind of making those things happen without guidance from coaches, without somebody telling you, hey, here's when we all have to be together and meet. If you all are meeting on your own, that just takes such a huge weight off of our shoulders and kind of helps free us up to maybe get more information about the infrastructural things and maybe what things you all can do to help. But I would say every situation is kind of different. I would say feel free to reach out to your coach and ask, but if your coach says like, hey, I don't know, they may just be telling you the truth. A lot of people at this point, unfortunately, don't quite know.
So the next question is, who are some leaders you think set a good model for transformational leadership and why?
Well, that's a great question. The person that I want to shout out the most is a young woman that maybe some of you have met named Brooke Kimbrough. Brooke was a lab leader in the K Lab. She was one of my lab students way back in the day in the 2013 Michigan lab. And she was the University of Iowa debater and a national champion. But what made Brooke unique was that Brooke said, I am so tired of there being a gap between the person that I want to be when I leave debate and the person that I am right now as I'm in debate. And Brooke did some of the most radical things I've ever seen any debater do, in debate. But in my mind, that's not what made her a transformational leader. That's what made her a great thinker. What made her a transformational leader was that when anybody on our team was hurting, Brooke was literally always there. And she was the person people trusted the most when those things happened, sometimes even coaches. Would go to her, and that kind of mantra of showing individual consideration is something she always did. She was always talking about, what guided and motivated her in debate, what her vision in debate was. And that was inspiring, to all of us. And I will say too, this is often the case with transformational leaders. It was not always easy. Brooke had a lot of ideas about how the team should work that were often different than the ones that I had. And I've never been so challenged by a debater in so many good ways as I was by Brooke, or had somebody with so many strong ideas for kind of how the team should look and how it should operate. But I will tell you that today, now even several years removed from Brooke moving on from the team, her influence is still there all the time. We still talk about her all the time. And Iowa debate will just never be the same because Brooke transformed it and transformed how we do things.
So the next question is, next year I will be the only senior on my team. I'm usually a pretty quiet person, but our coach seems to try to nudge me into a leadership role. How do you recommend scaling up to get people to view you as a leader?
That's a great question. And that goes back to that thing that I was trying to say, which is like, I don't want people to think that like a leader needs to be loud and boisterous. They thought that for a long time. Like the great extroverts must be the great leaders. And yeah, I mean, there's some traits of extroversion that do correlate positively, like being a good communicator. But you don't have to be extroverted. You don't have to be loud. The best leaders are often the people who bring people together with kind of a clear goal. And if you don't like to do a lot of the talking, in many ways, that's a great thing. That means that you can help organize things, but then kick things over to other people. And so one way that I might put that into practice is, let's say that you've kind of called together a meeting for your team, a squad meeting, and you've assembled the agenda because you're the senior and you've worked with the coach to kind of put that together. You should reach out to some of the more experienced members in your team or some of the other people that will also be doing good things, even though they're younger, and saying, hey, can you take the lead on, this part of the meeting, and assign people, kind of things, in between, and help people kind of become, the chiefs of their own domain. That goes along with that broader point, which is to make things intellectually stimulating and to challenge people. If you challenge other people to speak up, not only does it help take some of the burden of having to do all the talking off of you, it also gets other people really involved. It makes them feel like they're really a big part of things. And they will appreciate that because they know that it's you giving them that space. You, the leader, are empowering them to help learn and grow and take things on. And hopefully that also helps take some of the pressure off of you to have to do all the talking all the time. But just know, great leaders do not need to be talkative. They do not need to be loud. They do not need to be extroverted. Some of the best leaders in debate history, some of the most accomplished debate people, were soft-spoken, but the things they said carried a lot of weight. You can be very soft-spoken, and you can keep living your life the way you live your life. Be true to yourself, and you'll be a great leader.
So the next question is about inspirational motivation. So you say it's about people showing a vision, showing them how their work is a part of that vision. How do you utilize that in debate? So for example, if you're trying to get a team file done, how do you inspire younger debaters to get their best work out of it?
That's a great question. And particularly in the context of a file, this is where I was talking before about giving people important assignments and maybe, letting them kind of learn to fail. So for example, don't just give your sophomores, uniqueness update after uniqueness update after uniqueness update. If there's a team that's hard to debate, challenge them. Say, I want you to try to work on a case negative. This team is really important. I know that that's a big kind of thing, and I'm going to help you through it. We're not just going to throw you to the wolves. I'll help you with each part of it. But give people significant work to do. People want to be challenged, and you need to be in that position, to fail, to learn. And I really think one way that you can kind of help inspire people is just to tell people, we're a smaller team. We maybe think about what, makes your team different. Maybe you don't have a million coaches, and what really sets your team apart, is that you all do really good research. That can be help be a powerful motivator. When someone's struggling with 4 different AP tests in 1 week, and they're like, oh my gosh, God, this file too on top of all of it. You can say, yeah, that really stinks. I really appreciate what you're doing. That is really kind of what makes our team different. And if we make it at the end of the year, it's going to be you doing stuff like this that does it. But every time you can find a way to just kind of celebrate somebody else's work. So for example, if you use a card that somebody else cut, if you take an idea that somebody else learned and brought to a team meeting, anytime you can just find a way to give somebody some props, people remember things like that. And something that you may not even remember you said as a senior can make all the difference in whether or not a sophomore even sticks with debate. And it all just comes with you kind of looking out and trying to recognize the good things people do and putting them in challenging and meaningful positions. Oh, I'm so sorry, Val, I think you.
Oh, sorry about that. One last question. How should we try to make new students or novices feel at home on the team?
That's a really great question. And that's something we've talked a lot about in college debate. Like, it's harder and harder to kind of recruit folks. But one thing I would say would maybe just be to have kind of like established teaching nights. Novices, especially, at the very beginning, they're sometimes a little bit easily overwhelmed. If you're like, okay, now you joined the debate team, it's a cult, here are the 20 meetings we're going to do this month. That can be a little bit overwhelming to somebody who's just jumping in and trying to get used to a new activity. But something that really does help a lot is novices love and idolize the older debaters. So if you can put yourself in a position where even just a small handful of the advanced debaters can, put together a meeting, with the novices. And of course, the coach can be there, to coordinate and kind of run things in the backgrounds and just, kind of keep things running smoothly. Pardon me, but if you can tune in, I can tell you everywhere that I've ever coached, the one universal trait among all my novices has been that they have always trusted my varsity debaters more than they have trusted me. And that's just fine with me. Students respond to older students, much more than they respond to the 32-year-old who's like, hey, maybe you can hang out. And that means that it's especially important for you as students to reach out knowing that you have so much more influence over young folks. And just, again, one compliment that you give to your novices. I remember one time that I was in a lab, I taught a novice lab at Baylor. It was one of the first labs that I taught. And it was way back in, I think 2010 on the sub-Saharan Africa, kind of topic. We were talking about healthcare. And this kid, we had been working all camp on just how to cut a card. And finally, he turned in a card that he had tagged killing eyes is what river blindness does best. And I was just like, oh dear. That's not exactly what we're going for. But my gosh, the kid just cut a card. That was a moment to celebrate. And so if you have those moments where you kind of, teach particular skills, like tonight we're going to learn how to cut a card. You share your screen over Zoom, you walk through really slowly, kind of step by step. Here are the pieces that we do. You kind of handhold. You can do incredible things in that format. And just know, I'm speaking on behalf of all the nation's coaches, we will be so happy if you help us kind of shoulder some of the load, because so many of your teachers now are teaching more classes. Some of them, in college are teaching in hybrid or dual environments between online and in person. If you can help bring your team together, if you can help train your younger members, all of that work is worth its weight in gold and is the stuff that transformational leadership is made of. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for joining us and for sharing all of this really incredible work with all these really great thoughts. And I thank you also for your leadership in the debate community as well.
Oh, thank you so much. Y'all, for those who don't know, Val has been doing, I know it's a team effort, and so I won't try to quantify it, but Val has been doing an incredible amount of work to get everything up and running. I never thought that an online camp could work this smoothly, or I'd feel this well prepared for everything in early June. And that's because Val has just been crushing it, working overtime. So thank you so much, Val. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, and thank you all so much for joining us. And we'll see, hopefully, most of you next week for CB's webinar. And we will see all of you in just a couple short weeks for the Michigan Debate Institute. Thank you so much.
Be well.